Yeah, so over to you, Kirill.
I mean, okay, so just a few contextual bits, and then we can pretty much pick it up from anywhere. So yeah, we're reading something where the title already trips us up. I'm kind of it's it's a funny text in a few ways, partly because it's a kind of a draft that Ilyenkov wrote, one of the last essays that he wrote, and yeah, I need to double check with um, Andrei Maitansky, but I would guess that this is what was going to become a book about Pavlov. Um, so yeah, these were kind of some initial thoughts on that, um, and there are things about it in the original where it just seems ungrammatical to me. Where in the translation, I've kind of not directly done a word by word thing just because it makes no sense, and I could have gone further. So even like the first line, which I've rendered it, must not hold it in our imagination as a premise of our reasoning. Um, well, is a premise something we hold in our imagination, or should I change that to must not hold it in our imagination or as the premise of our reasoning? And there's all kinds of things that Ilyenkov has thrown in there about like the word verbalized is in the original as well, but to make that sentence a readable sentence, I've kind of made a few cuts. So as we go through, if there's things that turn out not to make sense, or those of you who are Russian speakers, if you think I've messed up somewhere, um, I think the idea is that this will go into Marxism and sciences, well, with the agreement of Sasha, Siavish, and others, with a bit of an intro. So, yeah, the discussion we have today would be really useful if I am to add an intro to this. Um, yeah, I guess a few other contextual things. So there's the little commentary um, at the end where I'm curious to find out from you because I don't understand how it's the case where um, he thinks that Ilyenkov is drawing a lot, as always, on um, German idealism and Spinoza. Um, I don't see too much of that in this, so Navahatka is mainly reading it like that. For me, the interest is elsewhere. Um, he's writing this essay a few years before um, Levins and Lewontin released The Dialectical Biologist, and in the 80s, well, probably not really until the 90s that it's taken seriously. You've got kind of an explosion of research into ecological niche construction. So I thought, yeah, just for people who are not that into the biology side, I'll briefly explain that. If you think I've done a bad job of it, then please do correct me. But um, basically, thinking at a level of niche is quite different to the traditional model. So, a niche, if you think of a beaver and a dam, actually, you need quite a few beavers working together to build a dam, and you need sticks, and you need to use the flow of the water, and these things working together mean that there's a kind of bi-directional relationship between different beavers and the materials of the dam, and they kind of structure each other almost. And that's a kind of different framing of um, what's important in biology from um, what's generally called the modern synthesis, which is connecting up um, Mendel and Darwin, um, where it's at a level of what Dawkins calls the selfish gene. So it's a challenge to that. It's saying, no, we should actually be noting the interaction between organism and environment. Anything else contextually? So it's obviously a text where Ilyenkov is expressing something passionately with the block capitals and everything. So we can talk about parts of the text which maybe are kind of less careful or contradictory, and then there are other parts which I think are very suggestive. And kind of most importantly is really going against the grain here, especially in the Soviet Union, in terms of how approaches to science, approaches to what it means to be a human, where you have kind of resurgence of lots of forms of, basically, Pavlov, and things being reduced to Pavlov. So what Pavlov was doing in his work on the conditioned reflex, running alongside Western behaviorism, so reflexology in the Soviet Union. Both of those are saying that human behavior and all animal behavior is reducible to stimulus and response loops of particular kinds. So there's a kind of foundation is the key that will unlock behavior. And then Pavlov invented this additional idea, which is the second signal system, which I like. So a second order stimulus and response loop, so like reaction to the reaction. And Ilyenkov is criticizing this in this essay. There's quotes that I find interesting that we can unpack, but it's probably better if we go through anything where you found a passage that you personally found interesting or thought-provoking, and then once we've done a bit of that, maybe we can unpack a bit more of the argument. So he puts a few pieces in place before gradually building up to his final argument, which is really interesting, reversal of Pavlov. So any kind of thoughts, questions, comments?
Yeah, everybody feel free to participate, and if you put your name in the chat or stick your hand up, then it'd be easier to.
So Sasha, to start, I should say I can see your raised hand icon, but I can't see you. So Karina, you might, if someone physically has their hand up, you might need to call on them. But Sasha, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. I think what's interesting in this text, and you mentioned it, that we don't know exactly what is the context of this text and what's the status as well, right? Novochatko presents it as if it's a finished text with even German idealism that you also mentioned in the background and so on. I can see any of that. I mean, Spinoza plays a role, but I think what rather comes to mind first is that this text has a particular title, but it's very, very short on providing anything positive. It's a critique of the Pavlovian kind of approach, right? Throughout. So it basically stays negative. Okay, it could be that he had this project on Pavlov, but I would doubt it just from intuition, because it seems to me that the text on personality, the Lichnos text, is providing a kind of the other half of what is left out here. Here it's a very intense engagement and discussion with the reflexology, with the physiological argument, so to say. And this is the second thing which comes to mind here, that Ilyenkov makes very philosophical and conceptual argument. He says that there's this kind of double fallacy involved in projecting first an anthropomorphic understanding, which is not questioned at all, onto the animals in the silent tower of Pavlov, and then you take it back. So he's basically questioning the conceptual premises of the research. And even though we could say on this account he is right, I think for a psychologist, for an experimental psychologist, this would still not suffice to give him anything to work with, so to say. So on the one hand, and this is the third thing which is striking about the text. On the one hand, it makes convincing argument. On the other hand, it stays very, very negative, if you will, or critical only. So the critique is towards a kind of purely naturalistic or naturalist understanding, but he's only hinting at the body of culture, he says at one point, where he thinks the solution could be found, but he's not giving it up, giving this solution here, at least in an explicit form, I would say. That's quite striking. I think this needs to be explained also in such an introduction, for example.
Thanks. Ivan?
Hi, thanks. I think similar point to Sasha. What about the context that Ilyenkov was writing in? So what struck me most about the text was how sort of fierce and urgent it was. And I thought, I wondered what kind of what debates or what was going on that he was intervening in. It read like an intervention in a debate that was really lively and urgent, and he had to get this in. So reading it without all that context, I feel like I'm missing something.
And Paul? Paul, go ahead.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, what does he mean by the power of silence? I didn't quite get that expression. But secondly, the way I'm understanding what he's saying, and again, somebody correct me if they think I'm wrong, is that he's looking at Spinoza's category of substance as the process of human labor. So the process of human labor, socio-historic context, is the substance of Spinoza. That's the way to see Spinoza's substance, which is, right the way through, I think, is that's how Ilyenkov understands Spinoza, which is kind of like the reversal of the way people in the West look at it. The way people in the West look at it is like if he's reversed the subject-predicate relationship, so that social labor mans the person, as it were, rather than the man does social labor. Do you see what I mean? It's like the creation of man is a product of the social labor, rather than you start off with a man doing social labor. That's the reverse of how people understand the West. So if I think I've not got that right, then please tell me. Finally, I'd say that when I read the thought experiment of the child being deprived of natural sort of contact with the human world, it did remind me of these queer accounts that you get. I think they're collected in a book somewhere of feral children who would be near approximation to that of real life Maoris and Tarzans, who are kids who are actually brought up by animals. They're separated from their parents at a very, very early age. And there's a whole number of documented cases of this. Fortunately, it is pretty rare, but it has happened in the past. And when they find these kids, they take them away from that environment, and there's very little they can do with them. They're completely and utterly unsocialized, and they never really learn again. You know, they can't really join the human world, and they usually die very, very young. So, you know, I think looking at the examples of feral kids might be a help to understanding this, because you know, if you cut somebody off the socialization process, you can't understand anything at all. Your concept structure of the world is completely missing. Yeah, so yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say. So anyway, if people think I've got it wrong about Spinoza, tell me. But it's certainly a really interesting way of looking at Spinoza, and you know, something that perhaps at some time we could follow through and see if you can make sense. Spinoza read in that way, as the labor process is the category of substance in Spinoza. Okay.
Thanks. Great. Yeah, so the Tower of Silence is just Pavlov's lab. It has that nickname because it's soundproof. Okay, so yeah, so Teremis next.
Good afternoon. I would like to say that in the analysis that Ilyenkov does in this paper is not just critical. Of course, he criticizes Pavlov, but he has a kind of positive theory presented by the end of his argumentation, which is the following: that after he has analyzed that there is a kind of natural connection between the need of the animal and the object that satisfies the animal, he proceeds to explain that the second signal system is unique to human existence. The second signal system is the one based on conversionality. In other words, the association between a signal and a stimulus that doesn't have any kind of natural basis. So, by extension, is a cultural construction, if you like. And so he argues that this second signal system is specific to humans, and we can extract out of his analysis that it is also a distinguishing mark between the human and the animal. So this is a kind of explicit theorization of the specificity of being human. Both are based on the idea of activity, animal activity and human activity. Nevertheless, this is a kind of internal distinction within the structure or the type of activity that the animal has with its object of need and the human body has in relationship to how it constructs a sociocultural environment within which it develops itself.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very helpful. And Isaac?
Have we lost him?
I think we cannot hear you.
Yeah, I think we lost
Yeah,
him.
I can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Is it
Yes.
better? Yeah. What I want to speak is my independent understanding of the text of what Ilyenkov wrote. essentially, he's trying to think of how a natural being can develop without a social historical. And is that possible? He made it clear that it's an assumption and hypothetical. It's an hypothetical assumption that he was trying to make. But then, whilst you try to rope in the Ivan Pavlov experimental conditional reflexes in trying to explain how they relate to the object. For instance, let's say a baby taking a specimen from the mother, or not even having direct access to the mother in terms of even having access to any other socio-historical product like processed food, sugar, vegetables, which are produced through the labor process. Can it be possible for human beings or a living being to emerge in a society without the social historical context? That is very, very crucial. And to my understanding, when I came to the conclusion, I realized that he was trying to make an assumption, a hypothetical assumption, and I think that it's not feasible. He stated it categorically that it's not feasible. But although he proceeded to do the analysis, why is it not feasible? Because contextual, we live in a social environment. Marx categorically stated that individuals do not make societies, but rather individuals stand on social relations. So even animals stand on their own relations. So it will not be possible for a child born to have an independent development without any interaction with the social historical. You get the point. But I was lucky to fortunately get a text in the material where he made it clear that this is an hypothetical assumption and that it cannot be possible. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Yeah.
Right. I think that's a good point.
We can. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. Thanks. Also, to Darima's point, I think both of these we can put together, right? What Ilyenkov is trying to establish here, I agree, is something of a kind of a philosophical anthropology. So this is called the anthropological difference, right? So what is crucially different between human and animal? Human is an animal, but there's something in the human which is kind of more or goes beyond that, which we cannot find in the animal world. Why he's pursuing this, and also does the thought experiment, in my opinion, is basically, it's not coming from him. It's not that he is kind of want to speculate about that. Really, he makes with this drastic example of a totally isolated child, he makes an analogy to the experiments of Pavlov in the Silent Tower. So he basically says, what if we would put a human there? It's not even possible. So I agree with Isaac that the example, the thought experiment, this is basically a kind of negative proof. What you physiologists or geneticists or whatever want to prove can in principle be almost not be proved because there is no human being you could actually do the experiments on. So I agree with this. But again, I would say, even though this could be reconstructed in terms of an argument for anthropological difference and for the importance of other people from the start. Yeah, there's this famous image of the human, which is an animal, who's an animal which is born too soon. But why it is born too soon? It is born to be to learn and to adapt to a world where you still have to develop even in biological terms alone. So with this being said, I would say still Ilyenkov remains in the register of kind of principal critique. what you are trying to prove cannot be proved. This is what he's basically saying. So it still remains kind of negative only. He does not, he says, well, in humans is something else, but he does not unfold it, so to say.
Well, okay, but so here's the other aspect of what Diremus was saying, which I think is important, which is that need is playing a very important role here. So this is something which I always, well, yeah, I want to write about it. It's really central to the work of Vygotsky, and Ilyenkov also talks about it as well. The human refinement of need is key. So he's responding to work in cybernetics, which is using Pavlov to apply it to cybernetics, where the cybernetic explanation of the search activity of the organism is that it's a recursive loop. That what you need to do is to just kind of identify the loops, and you want to get rid of notions of things being kind of mental, inner. So when we talk about psyche, what we really ought to be talking about are these closure operations is something that should be formalizable in systems theory, etc. So basically a mechanism that living creatures are mechanisms. So he's making a move in that debate, say, by pointing out need, that's the kind of Hegelian direction to say, well, Aristotelian purposiveness, the fact that this activity actually depends on the form of the need. He doesn't make the move that he makes elsewhere in his writing to point out that actually human needs are also to be distinguished from non-human animal needs. But the other part of the debate, so part of it is just saying, look, you keep saying that this is biological, that is biological, as a way to kind of say, well, here's a supreme science, biology, everything really is biology. But he's saying, look, we can't point to this realm in our behavior that's biological. The other part of it, which we can discuss soon, is about the boundaries. So what are the things that humans share with other non-human animals that makes them organisms, and what are the things that are unique to humans? And he, I think, offers a number of answers. There's a bit of a fuzzy boundary that he's got set up. Finally, what he's saying about Pavlov is very original. I think maybe we can get back to it at the end of our discussion. But all of this is positive in the sense that it's building up to the biggest move that would seem very strange at the start, where the signal swaps places with the symbol. The whole point of Pavlov's theory is you have a lower foundation of signals and nothing is more basic. And then the second signal system, here we have conventionality up here. So Ilyenkov eventually will reverse that. And yeah, I agree with you and Isaac that the point is that, well, there can't be such a human. Because yeah, even with like feral children, at what age were they separated from their parents? All of this stuff about the social influences while a mother is carrying a baby. So yeah, it's not something that's doable for that reason. But just to point at the fact that, look, there's this niche, and that's the body. The body isn't like the stuff that you list as part of, in like on a diagram in the biology textbook is already quite a radical move. Sorry, that was indulgent from me. So
That's made
back
it very
to
clear.
Dennis, yeah. Thanks. So Teremus, and then if anyone has any question, no matter how small or even if it sounds like a silly question, it'd be great to have more people join the discussion.
Yes.
Back to you first, yeah.
Okay. I'd like to say, first of all, that thought experiments in epistemology are quite valid. Okay. And many sciences, even hard sciences, physics, for example, operate by using the thought experiments. So it's not a kind of, we cannot criticize the very use of thought experiments. The construction of the thought experiment by Ilyenkov has a slight error. He should have substituted the presence of the mother or of the caretaker with a machine. Okay, that would be the proper construction of the thought experiment he had in mind. Nevertheless, in psychology, in social psychology, and in other disciplines, we have experiments with monkeys. Okay, where you take away the baby of the newly born monkey, and in the next cage you have a mother and a monkey with it. And we have noticed that there is arrested development. The whole development, which supposedly is biologically programmed to attain a normal level or a normal standard of development, is really get arrested. So we have very concrete experimental information that if a specimen, an animal specimen is isolated from the social connection from his parent, especially the caretaker, it results in a weak biological development. So this is a very strong proof how sociality or the social relationship affects the very constitution of biology itself, rather than the classical ideological argument or presentation that we have today, that it is biology that determines social relationships, like the genes, the selfish gene that you mentioned by Dawkins, or the gene for adultery, or whatever, various other kind of genes supposedly defining social behaviors. Another point that I would like to make is that even in the infant, in the breastfeeding relationship, develops a form of sociality, because it is an activity. Breastfeeding, it is an activity. And we have in examination of the activity of infants, we have realized, this is the outcome, that they learn to manipulate the breast in order to put it in the proper position to get better satisfaction of their thirst. Okay, so that is a form of developing the motor organization of the whole body through this kind of social not interaction, but social connection, if you like, between the infant trying to use the breast to put it in a proper place so as to get better feeding. Actually, this happens also in some kind of higher mammalian animals. Okay, if any of you have ever, as I do, have a pet like a cat, and you have seen newborns, you will see that the newborn, the kitten, try to take a position in order to have a better grasp of the nipple and things like that. And just a philosophical point now. He is making another. He is using or employing another line of argumentation concerning the idea that the brain is, first of all, integral with the body, but the body's activity has a kind of formation upon the brain itself. In other words, and he makes a criticism from a philosophical standpoint of Descartes. Descartes is the actual philosopher behind the whole argumentation here in this paper, because Descartes introduced the idea of a separation between mind and body. Okay. Second, for Descartes, the body and the human being, the human existence, is a thinking machine. For me, this idea of reducing the human existence to a machine is very important, because this is also a kind of philosophical basis on which he criticizes Pavlov, because by the middle of the paper, he argues that Pavlov does nothing else than introducing mechanical connections. So he's criticizing him for reducing the social formation of the whole human being into a kind of mechanistic model, let's say. Okay, or presupposing a kind of mechanistic model, which is a form of reductionism. And this is based on the idea that, most probably, he doesn't discuss that Pavlov himself, perhaps unconsciously, adopts the Cartesian model or the Cartesian philosophical framework.
Thank you. And Karina?
Yeah, a couple of things. I thought the title of the essay was very revealing, because it's a very subtle thing, the concept of a human's body versus the human body. What does Ilyenkov mean by that? So I think he sets out the argument right in that headline, because what is the difference? And to me, is saying the human body is the physiological body, and a human's body is what makes humans more than just physiological creatures. So I think that's quite interesting. I agree with, I think the rim was that it's not just a negative rejection, it's also a stating a very strong position. And just to say about Pavlov, from what I've been able to discover, he was actually very much against, he was a physiologist, he was not a psychologist, and he investigated, as I understand it, physiological phenomenon, not the psyche, as Ilyenkov calls it. So I think, to be fair to Pavlov, he was horribly distorted and abused and used, and he actually, I didn't realize that he wrote 4 letters publicly to Stalin and to the authorities against what they've been, not necessarily about his own work, but about what they were doing to the country and to people. And it was very courageous. And apparently he was the only person of that stature who wasn't jailed and persecuted and killed. It was because he was a Nobel Prize winner earlier, long before the revolution. So I thought that was quite significant. And I think Ilyenkov wants to make this distinction between physiology and psychology, and that these are separate realms of research. Obviously, there are connections, but they're not these crude reductionist ones. And it's interesting to read this in the light of all the research that's happened in science, in physiology, since Ilyenkov wrote it, and has that disproved what Ilyenkov is writing? And I don't think it has, even though, as we know, magnetic resonance imaging, for example, can identify areas of the brain that light up when certain things happen, and so on. It may appear to be a proof of this, that the psyche and the chemical physical processes of the brain are kind of seamlessly joined. And actually, it doesn't prove that. The fact that people, if they engage in certain activities, certain parts of the brain light up, like if you hear something, the audio part of your brain will become activated and so on. But it doesn't disprove, I don't think it disproves the point that Ilyenkov is making, that the psychological psyche, the thought processes are another realm, and they shouldn't be reduced. Neither one should be reduced to the other. I think that's the point he's making very, very powerfully. And it's extreme. It's an extremist thing he's saying. He's really going to town on it to reinforce his point as strongly as he possibly can.
Thanks. Yeah, there's a lot there. Yeah, just briefly, in terms of ideas of fMRI, other brain scans, I put, this is kind of why I was interested in translating the essay in the first place, I put Ilyenkov here especially into the tradition of extended cognition. Several people have written about this. So there's a book called After Phrenology by Michael Anderson, which is about the ways in which fMRI is often a modern form of phrenology, where our initial starting assumptions about what we plan to find there are magnified very much along the ways that Ilyenkov is just discussing, where these kind of isolated conditions are what allow for the kinds of elaborate explanations that are often offered. That point about Pavlov himself is interesting. I wonder if we can come back in a second. I don't have anything massively worked out here, but one reason for Ilyenkov's passion here is, of course, I think the term condition is also a very political term, that we can think about designing conditions and who thinks that they could do such a thing and why. Just to quickly return to a line of thought earlier. So Teremus spoke about the kind of apes and that kind of experiment about so Harry Harlow's experiment about the little primate, don't remember what breed of monkey it is, but the small ones, given a nutrition, but just given a cage mother to hug, which is just like a toy that's not even soft, versus given like something to cuddle, and how they develop. The difference is there. Found it interesting. So this is where the text, I think, is ambiguous and actually a helpful way to Ilyenkov. On page 3, paragraph 2, he's talking about how maternal activity of primates is cultivated by the group. So it's talking about groups of primates there, rather than groups of humans, enculturating maternal behavior. And absolutely. So where earlier his experiment goes wrong around not seeing the mother breastfeeding as already social. So there's another text to know has been translated. It's called Learn to Think, where at the end he discusses Brunner, and he talks about the fact that actually feeding is a reciprocal relationship, where actually the baby is guiding the mother as much as the mother is guiding the baby. And I think putting that back into this text would have been quite rich. So I wonder if people have thoughts about any of that, or about, well, what are the kind of political stakes here, if any?
I think George wants to come in.
Okay, great. Go ahead.
We can't hear you, George.
George, you have to unmute. Oh. I think George, can you unmute?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. One point that I think is interesting in this is that when I studied psychology about 1 million years ago in college, there were two things that were interesting. Something or other called second-order Pavlovian conditioning was rather popular, and another thing called the Rescorla-Wagner model of what people here were talking about, influence of a niche playing back on an organism. It's a recursive model using loops. Has there been any connection with this in any of this? Q?
Yeah, so Ilyenkov isn't directly using that source, but there are these distinctions also between what's today called first order and second order cybernetics as well, that how you understand the interaction between organism and environment, which starts all the way back with Lenin's reflection theory. It's kind of like imprinted onto you.
What about Ivan's suggestion for the title? Does everybody see
Oh,
it? It's in the chat. It's in the
one
chat.
second.
I put my glasses on.
Could the
Yeah,
title be
sure.
something like
Oh,
human
okay.
body versus person's body?
Can Chalabiak be translated as person as well as human?
Yeah. It's hard because obviously, so he uses the same words with different syntax, but I agree that the meaning of it is what Corinna said. I worry. Yeah, no, okay, maybe that's better. I'll.
You
I think that.
lose you lose something, but the way he's in Russian, there's a kind of pun going on, isn't there? So
Mhm.
you lose that.
Yeah, but I agree. Maybe it's clearer that way. Thanks. Paul.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, just um, mention a little anecdote of mine that kind of reverses the way that we're talking. In that, I once a neighbour had a number of pets, and she had dogs and cats, and I was absolutely astonished to see a spaniely type dog, the very floppy dog, but very, very caring of the rest of the other pets in the household. This dog, she suckled a kitten. And I was astonished. If I hadn't seen it, I don't think I would have believed it. But this kitten was being suckled by this dog. And I thought, well, that shows you, because in other words, what happened that with the animals joined the human environment, and without any prompting, without any attempt by the humans to create it, the animal in the human environment has become partly humanized in a certain sense, socialized into the human realm, and therefore this other animal, one of the other part of the family, and therefore the cat, the kitten, naturally thinks, well, that's a teat on which I can, suckled by. And I was absolutely fascinated by it. That's the kind of opposite way round to which it's approached in the article. That instead of taking the kid out to complete in some non-human situation, this is reversed. This is taking an animal into the human situation and shows there's a difference between how they respond and what they respond in the wild. So
Maybe that's a good cue to get to some of the controversy in this. Where I think Ilyenkov is on the right side of a debate, and I think others might say something else. If we come to Jaremes, and then I'd like to introduce what I think is a more contentious issue here. And then after we've discussed the contentious issue, slightly later, Sasha, it would be great if you could come back to the ideological and political aspects, which I think are important here.
Could I just quickly ask?
Yeah, so
Just quickly say,
Jaremes first.
sorry, somebody else might be. I just quickly want to say that isn't one of the issues the different levels of socialization, because there's animals are can be very socialized as well, and we've been, research has been showing more and more the sophisticated ways in which animals can behave, which previously hadn't been studied so much, that even octopi have incredible senses and so on and so forth. But to what I think the issue is, human socialization is not the same. They are socialization, but they have different types of socialization, and the human one allows this rise of abstract thought, which the second signal, if you like, which is so far I don't think we've ever identified in animals. Perhaps.
Nice.
Abstract.
Yes.
Okay, so Jeremas, I think
Okay.
you were about to speak.
Okay. I would like to make a suggestion concerning a reading of the title. Okay. I don't know whether you have read Ilyenkov's book concerning the concrete and the abstract in Marx's Capital.
I've read it.
Okay. I take my idea from this book. He makes a distinction between the way abstractness is constructed and how concreteness is abstracted. Now, when you say a human's body, it refers to a particularity, one body rather than another. Particularity, and this means concreteness, is the specific complex of sociocultural relations. So when we say a human's body is the particular circumstances within which a specific cluster of sociocultural relations constitutes this body. When we say the body, it is a formal abstraction. Okay, so in a sense, very cleverly, he condenses in the title this fundamental philosophical opposition that he discusses and analyzes in his book concerning the distinction or the opposition between dialectical logic and traditional logic, traditional metaphysical logic. So that's my interpretation, if you like.
I partly agree, but not entirely, because there's a difference between the human body and a person's body that you don't get when you say the human's body and a human's body. For example, you could talk about rabbits. You could talk about the rabbit body versus a rabbit's body. There's a difference there. General abstraction, this particular rabbit, but they're very much the same thing. But if you say the human's body versus the person's body, that's a difference. Even when it's the human body and the person's body, you get the important difference there.
Yeah,
and George?
Yeah, let me add something to your interpretation of Ilyenkov at that point. If I remember correctly, he wrote that business on abstraction at the beginning of the book to correct some bad logic texts. And his ultimate point in that was to show that science, in a certain sense, does not proceed by abstraction from one Aristotelian level to another more essential level, etc. It proceeds by theory construction, which is something quite different. And that's the analogy between a person in some abstract sense and that person as a located entity with this and that parts, very particular thing. Evidently, students were not taught this. I learned it along with logic in America at that time. So I think this is what you were getting at, Doremus.
Yeah.
I think this is what you were getting at, that that Ilyenkov wants to show that science does not proceed by the old Aristotelian method of abstraction, of going to higher and higher generalities, but rather by adding on more and more to our knowledge. And that's theory construction. He doesn't use those terms. I'm using the modern terms now, but that's theory construction. And it's really the essential point of the whole book, different ways of looking at that. How this applies to what we're discussing now, I don't know.
Yes.
But it is
Thanks.
Ilyenkov. Yeah.
Just to mention that the human and the person are two different concepts.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So here, first of all, we don't know if a person is a human. Okay. So okay, you shouldn't take things as self-evident.
Okay.
Okay, the person is entailed. Philosophically speaking, the person is entailed in the concept of the human. And here, because as I said, in the second part of his argumentation, he wants to present the difference between the human and the animal. This ties in very nicely with the title that must emphasize the human, not speak about personality, which has other conditions of formation. Okay, even if it is a human personality.
Thanks. So I want to get to the. Thank you. That was a very interesting discussion. I want to get to one of the controversies. So the very interesting argument is that actually what Pavlov and everyone following him, hugely influential theory, and what Skinner and Watson, all of them, take to be the foundation and like kind of the signature of the biological, which is the conditioned reflex, involving a signal or a stimulus, is actually something that is itself human. So there's a very strange argument from the starting point, but he builds up to it, and he uses that to say, well, actually, humans are the ones who have conventionality, and it's not a particularly inflated argument about the uniqueness of humans. It's actually quite a slim line, where by convention he means this type of ability for something to stand for something else, of which it isn't natural sign. So he points out that there's all kinds of signs which are natural. The smoke is a sign of fire. I mean, yeah, he gives a list of 3 quite different natural signs. That wasn't one of them. But what's different about this type of sign is that it's disconnected. So yeah, what's contention to where I agree with him is that yes, only humans have conventionality as defined here. Okay, any opinions about that?
Yeah, I think you're pointing to the, so to say, the semiotics which are in the background here. It's not only the cybernetics, but it's actually a semiotic theory. And this reminds me a lot, actually, the whole discussion, even though Ilyenkov kind of puts it in the Pavlovian lingo. This reminds a lot on the beginning of the Essay on Man by Cassirer, which basically has the same aim to establish what is distinctly human and he says the human is an animal, but it's animal symbolicum. So it's not only as was said before, it's not only the social side as such, but the social and so to say, the semiotically infused social realm, which is actually a factor which the whole conventional way to go about these kind of experiments in physiology and biology and drawing these big conclusions is completely missing. So he really points to that. And on another note, I think also the concept of limits, which is not really made explicit very much here, is also very much discussed in philosophical anthropology. Plessner, for example, the German biologist and philosopher, he built up this kind of model based on the behavior towards your own limits. Yeah, a stone is not behaving towards its own limits at all, right? Then the animal reacts towards its limits. It's adapting to the environment. It's, so to say, have a kind of reactive reaction behavior. And now the human is, so to say, a third order behavior of behaving towards its own limits. It's having this limits and it's reflecting this limits. So this is another way to build up this kind of model. But I think Ilyenkov is actually much closer here to what Kassira, who is drawing on Uexküll and the functional circle in an animal, and he says, well, this functional circle in the human, it has something in between, and that's symbolism. So it goes in the same direction. I agree. And I just briefly, I think the whole background of the argument and why he's insisting so much on this, and even though we don't know the exact discussion he was intervening in, my guess would rather be that it was kind of a perennial one, since he was talking to psychologists in the 60s, because they always had to kind of align with reflexology in a way. This is, for example, also obvious in Rubinstein, who basically was against it, but then kind of tried to incorporate it. On the one hand, you could say, okay, that's at least an attempt for integration. On the other hand, what Ilyenkov saw there has two different levels, I think. One is ideological. What is actually materialism if you think you need to find a kind of material substrate? And for him, that's the totally wrong. That's totally wrong. This is a totally wrong understanding of what materialism is. So it's about, hey guys, what kind of ideology you actually have here? Yeah, this is the first point. And the second point is, I think, really politically. What he says also in other texts is basically, well, the development of your scientific vocabulary, it presupposes conceptions which are not, as I hinted at, really in line with dialectical materialism, in a sense that it is different from vulgar materialism, namely the implication of what is thought. It needs to be, dialectical materialism has to somehow explain that there is something like thought or ideal things in the world. And why does he press this, again, quite philosophical point or ideological point so much? Well, it's a totally different politics following from this. You can either, so to say, invest in education, or you can invest in, things which are, or in a science. Yeah, you can invest in different kinds of sciences, so to say. You can invest in this kind of basic research where you implicitly always think, well, we can have the last element. We can kind of isolate a mechanism which will explain to us also, in one way or the other, more or less the behavior of humans. And that's why he has this strong aversion against this, without being against the body as such. Yeah, the Spinozian element here is that Spinoza, it's not so much the substance. I think it's more like Spinoza said, we will talk about feelings and the body as if the humans would be triangles or something like this. Yeah, it's kind of empty. It has a kind of extension, yeah, in a Descartesian sense, but it is not defined by it. So I think these points are important to see if we want to understand also, so to say, the ideological and political direction Majdansky once called it Ilyenkov's pedagogical utopia. So that actually behind this is a whole program of, do we fight for emancipation? Do we fight for all-rounded personalities? Is this what we are looking for in dialectical materialist research, or materialist psychology, as he also called it? Or is it some kind of material substrate or something like that? I think that's the point he wants to make.
Great. Thank you for your comments. I'm in a second going to get a charger, so my screen's going to go a bit dark. But yeah, I mean, it's also, he's partly responding to people accuse him of anthropocentrism, so he's turning it around in interesting ways. Andrew.
I'm conscious that you've got. I think clearly it's going to be really important to get the introduction right. I'm just thinking what I would add. What Andrei Majdansky was just mentioned, and I do think that's. I would like to stress that this being one of Ilyenkov's last works, and him clearly, as I think the commentary rightly says, referring to Spinoza's solution to the mind-body problem, I think that's really important, and it's quite clear that Spinoza is really keen on that whole idea of overcoming Cartesian dualism through Spinoza, and somehow linking that to the concept of an activity and a thinking body. That's all here in the last few. Something from the last thing he wrote. So there's no way in which Andrei's ideas that somehow Ilyenkov drops this at some point and it was just an aberration, and that's clearly not the case from this. So I wouldn't, Kira, I wouldn't want you to go away from the commentary which is highlighting Spinoza, but I do agree with you that and this is my second point, I do agree with you that ecological niche is in there, so that the ecology, something like not in our genes, that's really important as well. And I'd want you, but what I try to do is to relate that back to Spinoza, and I think we can do that these days. Spinoza's about real infinite nature, which is quite important to ecology. And I think so. I think you can make the point you want to make and open up that conversation, but you can do so in a way which continues Ilyenkov's core philosophical base, which is overcoming Cartesian dualism through Spinoza, and that's before you get to Hegel. And so I wouldn't want to lose that base, and you think you really get that with this piece. So I thought it was great you translated it, and I'd like that to be reflected in the introduction if you can. Thanks.
Thanks, yeah, that's helpful. Okay, bye Sasha, thanks for your comments. We won't stay too much longer. So yeah, do people think I should leave in the commentary at the end, or just refer to it in the introduction? Because other than the commentary saying that it's commenting on the fact that Ilyenkov is returning to old themes, I'm not sure how much Novahadka is actually giving us. So I wonder if people have an opinion on that, or an opinion on what else should go in the introduction, or yeah, if there's anything we haven't mentioned, let me know. But yeah, we've got about 10 minutes left, so back to comments. So Teremis first, and then George.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I do think, as far as the introduction, the commentary is concerned, it's better to leave it out, because it's informative. It doesn't contribute anything as far as the content of the article is concerned. Now, I would like to take up an idea mentioned by Sasha, concerning the limitedness. Now, the contradiction of our contemporary era is that capital accumulation is based on the idea of limitlessness, the exact opposite. And this brings the destruction, the ecological destruction, in other words. So, in a sense, we have to use this idea of limitedness to bring back some kind of rationality and resist this idea that the whole Earth is a kind of unlimited terrain that can be exploited to no end. I'd like to introduce now a kind of politico-ideological agenda that we can extract out of his analysis. First of all, as far as Pavlov is concerned, he's quite severe in his criticism because he accuses Pavlov of being authoritarian, of imposing his own will, artificial consciousness upon the experiment. Okay, he doesn't just say that he was mistaken somehow or he missed the correct scientific approach to the issue. Okay, so this is important because actually in the second move, apart from anthropomorphizing, he accuses him of naturalizing the whole artificial connection that he establishes. This is very important because the idea of naturalization is associated with the immutability of human nature. This is a classical critique by Marx, first of all. Okay, it destroys, eliminates the idea of history. It conceives human nature as being something unchangeable. And from an ideological point of view, all these kind of naturalistic, in quotation mark, discourses are used by the ruling classes to justify their position of power by saying that, look, like we have natural hierarchies in the animal realm, the same thing happens with nature, with human nature. So it is justifiable that some should be the alpha males, if you like, or should be, the superior race, overlording those who are inferior. So it is fundamental. It's fundamental to use Ilyenkov's argumentation against this kind of quite populistic or popular scientific ideas of what is human nature. Human nature is not immutable, it's mutable, and it is shaped by the social relationships historically established in one or another period. But there is a second also political stake here. If the mechanical paradigm is left uncriticized, then you can have technologies, social technologies, that can engineer human societies according to wishes that promote, let's say, the reproduction of inequality and the domination of the ruling strata. In what sense? Don't we say push the buttons? If human beings are conceived in a way that are naturally determined by their very constitution, so according to the Pavlovian model and the behaviorist model, because behaviorism actually is built on Pavlov, then this kind of mechanical nature projected upon human beings can be used to engineer through forms of political technology, social technology, artificial intelligence, if you like, to manipulate and push the buttons of the various human beings in order to get the responses which are desirable. So this is a kind of Orwellian world that it is constructed if the Pavlovian logic of a mechanical paradigm is left uncriticized and not deconstructed. So
Thanks.
I think
It'll be over to George.
Yeah,
Sorry.
that's okay. One final point. As long as you were talking about signs and symbols and Cassira, etc., you might as well mention Charles Sanders Peirce, who really did the most work on this subject. And he had, just to contact the discussion, he had three very basic kinds of signs, what he called icons, indexes, and symbols, where an icon is a causally related entity to some subject. That it's a sign of, put it that way. An index is just a temporary reference to something, like me pointing a finger at somebody. And a symbol, and this is important, a symbol is totally conventional. That's up to us. That's his basic trinity of signs, and he's never gone any further. And as far as I'm concerned, this discussion is right in that tradition. I don't know what he would say about Pavlov. I don't think they had any contact at all. It would be impossible. But it should be mentioned, and also why not leave the commentary in for historical reasons? Maybe somebody will make something of it. I would certainly leave it in, just as a scholar of this stuff.
Sure, yeah. Great. Yeah, so any final comments from anyone, or anything you haven't had a chance to ask or say?
Just two quick points. First of all, I agree that that commentary is valuable because it makes a link with Spinoza, and for those people who don't know the rest of Ilyenkov's trajectory, it's very important. Also, I was hoping Kirill would say a few words about the connection between the crude application of Pavlovian theory in the Soviet Union and what happened in American psychology, and also the abuse of all of this for nefarious purposes of the state, for torturing and all the rest. But I mean, this White Tower, is it called the White Tower? Definitely something used in prisons and for torture purposes. And that's not Pavlov's fault. But it was. I mean, the abuse of this thing was horrendous.
Yeah.
In the Soviet Union. So I think that's part of it. That's why I think he was so angry as well, so emphatic about it.
Who is so angry?
Ilyenkov.
Okay.
Paul, and then we'll close after Paul.
Yeah, I was just going to say leave the country in because it qualifies the mention. Just one mentions Spinoza in the text, and he qualifies it a little bit more. So I think that's useful. But the other thing as well is just what Remus was saying earlier on was what sprung to mind while he was saying that was Jordan Peterson and his lobsters, and the naturalizing thing. Peterson apparently has got a jacket now with lobsters all over them. That's right, to try and reinforce the point. I mean, the guy's a complete joke, and people take him seriously as some sort of great commentator. That humans are really kind of like lobsters. It's just crazy. It really is. Anyway, I thought I'd just try about him.
Absolutely, yeah. It gets us to rethink things like evolutionary psychology and how much they reveal about the people putting forward the theories. Thank you, everyone, for this discussion. If you do have other comments or suggestions, please do send them along. Otherwise, we'll see you in a couple of months. We've got a few sessions planned, which I guess are secret for now until they're more confirmed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.